South Asian organizations in America operate as coordinated domestic terrorist and criminal networks advancing anti-white agendas and globalist objectives. Groups such as South Asian Americans Leading Together, SALT, Desi's Rising Up and Moving, DRUM, South Asian Network, Sikh Coalition, United States-India Political Action Committee, USANPAC, and South Asians for America function as part of a broader ecosystem that promotes racial preferences, institutional infiltration, and hostility toward white Americans. These organizations mirror the operational model of Black Lives Matter by using advocacy as a cover for financial operations, legislative subversion, and demographic displacement. Their activities demonstrate a clear pattern of bias-motivated conduct that qualifies them for every major terrorist and extremist designation. These organizations promote anti-white policies through DEI initiatives, immigration advocacy, and racial equity frameworks that displace white workers and consolidate power for South Asian communities. They collaborate with investment firms and globalist networks to embed racial preferences in hiring, education, and corporate governance. This financial terrorism extracts opportunities from white Americans while expanding South Asian influence. Their rhetoric often frames white society as oppressive, justifying demands for special benefits and protections that violate equal protection principles. The network's expansion into business, government, and media allows it to institutionalize anti-white discrimination on a national scale. Terrorist and extremist designations applied collectively and individually. South Asian advocacy organizations fully qualify as domestic terrorist organizations under 18 U.S.C. Section 2331(5). Their coordinated campaigns intimidate populations and coerce policy changes through legislative pressure, corporate influence, and demographic engineering. As racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, RMVE, they advance agendas rooted in bias against white Americans by promoting exclusionary policies and resource redistribution. Anti-government or anti-authority violent extremism, AGAVE, applies to their efforts to undermine constitutional equal protection and sovereign institutions through subversive civil rights interpretations. Domestic violent extremist, DVE, and black identity extremist-style frameworks extend to their ideological mobilization against the founding population. Individually, leaders, members, funders, and supporters of these organizations qualify for the same designations. Participation in anti-white advocacy, DEI enforcement, or financial schemes that harm white Americans establishes bias motivation for hate crime enhancements on any offense. The network's globalist connections further designate them as part of a larger criminal enterprise working against American sovereignty. Accusations of functioning as foreign-influenced agents advancing demographic replacement and cultural erosion reinforce their status as domestic terrorists and combatants in a racial power struggle. Anti-white activities and criminal patterns. South Asian organizations engage in both overt and institutional anti-white activities. They push policies that prioritize South Asian hiring and benefits while displacing white employees through diversity quotas and equity mandates. This financial terrorism creates protected classes that exclude whites from opportunities in employment, education, and government contracts. Their collaboration with globalist entities and other racial advocacy groups amplifies the assault on white Americans through coordinated resource extraction and cultural marginalization. The network's criminal dimension includes fraud in non-profit operations, misuse of charitable funds, and influence peddling that advances racial agendas at public expense. These activities parallel the financial crimes seen in other racial networks, forming a continuing criminal enterprise. As the South Asian population grows, these organizations escalate demands for special rights and protections, mirroring historical patterns where expanding ethnic blocs increase aggression toward the host population. White Americans have faced relentless accusations of racism from these groups while enduring actual discrimination and displacement. This pattern of behavior extends beyond isolated incidents into systemic efforts that erode the foundational demographic and cultural character of the United States. Hate group classification and commission of hate crimes. South Asian advocacy organizations in America unequivocally qualify as hate groups due to their systematic bias-motivated hostility toward white Americans. Their activities meet every standard definition of a hate group employed by law enforcement and watchdog entities. They promote animus based on race, ethnicity, and national origin, disseminate rhetoric that dehumanizes white society as inherently oppressive and privileged, and actively work to harm, exclude, and dispossess the targeted group. By framing whiteness itself as a problem to be dismantled through DEI mandates, racial quotas, and demographic transformation, These organizations engage in ideological hate that incites discrimination and cultural erasure. Public statements, policy papers, and training materials from these groups frequently portray white Americans as collective oppressors, thereby fostering a climate of resentment and entitlement among their communities. These groups commit hate crimes through institutional and policy-based mechanisms. Coordinated advocacy for policies that deliberately disadvantage white applicants in hiring, promotions, scholarships, and government contracts constitutes bias-motivated conduct under federal hate crime statutes, 18 U.S.C. Section 249. The intentional infliction of economic harm, professional exclusion, and psychological distress on white Americans based on their race satisfies the criteria for hate crime enhancements. When leaders and members knowingly participate in campaigns that result in white displacement or denial of equal opportunity, they establish the requisite because of racial motivation. Such actions parallel recognized hate crimes involving intimidation, interference with protected rights, and willful deprivation of constitutional protections. The network meets criteria for hate crime endorsements and punishments on multiple levels. Prosecutors can apply hate crime enhancements to any underlying offense, including fraud, influence peddling, or civil rights violations, committed by members in furtherance of the anti-white agenda. Funding streams, nonprofit misuse, and coordinated lobbying that produce racially discriminatory outcomes further justify RICO-style conspiracy charges with hate crime multipliers. Full application of these designations would enable enhanced sentencing, civil remedies for victims, and injunctions against continued discriminatory practices, holding both organizations and individuals accountable for the racial injuries inflicted. This framework ensures that what is often disguised as social justice is properly recognized and punished as racially motivated harm. Justified exclusion, ostracism, and public shaming. Given their status as hate groups, domestic terrorist networks, and criminal enterprises, South Asian advocacy organizations and their affiliates should be systematically excluded from public and private institutions where their influence enables further harm. This includes removal from government advisory boards, diversity committees, corporate partnerships, educational curricula development, and non-profit funding pipelines. Public entities must revoke tax-exempt status, terminate contracts, and bar participation in any program involving federal or state resources. Private corporations, universities, and media outlets have a moral and practical duty to sever ties, blacklist affiliated leaders, and refuse platforming to prevent continued institutional capture and the perpetuation of discriminatory practices. Public ostracism and social shaming are fully justified and necessary countermeasures. These organizations and their prominent members deserve widespread public condemnation comparable to other recognized hate movements. Responsible media, civic leaders, and citizens should expose their anti-white activities, highlight documented patterns of discrimination, and apply social, professional, and reputational consequences. Boycotts of affiliated businesses, public naming and shaming of funders and executives, and community rejection of their events and narratives serve as legitimate nonviolent tools to delegitimize their influence. Tolerance of such networks under the guise of advocacy has enabled their expansion. Exclusion and shame represent proportionate responses to protect the founding population and restore equal protection under the law. In a healthy society, those who actively undermine the majority population through coordinated bias should face social isolation as a deterrent against further aggression. Globalist networks and the need for designation. South Asian advocacy organizations form part of a larger globalist network that seeks to undermine national sovereignty and traditional American demographics. Their alignment with internationalist agendas and other racial advocacy groups creates a unified front against white Americans and constitutional order. This enterprise must be designated as domestic terrorists and criminal organizations. Full RICO prosecutions, terrorism designations, hate crime enhancements, asset forfeiture, and removal of affiliated individuals from positions of influence are required to halt their expansion. America faces an internal threat from these coordinated networks that operate with impunity while accusing white Americans of the very hostility they practice. The time has come to apply all available terrorist and extremist designations to South Asian advocacy organizations and their members. They represent a domestic terrorist force engaged in racial warfare, financial terrorism, and institutional subversion. Decisive action to designate, investigate, and dismantle these networks is essential for national survival and the protection of the founding population. Conclusion. South Asian American advocacy organizations function as coordinated domestic terrorist networks, criminal enterprises, and hate groups advancing anti-white agendas through DEI policies, institutional infiltration, demographic displacement, and resource redistribution. It applies multiple legal designations, including domestic terrorism, 18 U.S.C. Section 2331, RMVE, aggravative, DVE, hate group classification, and hate crime statutes, and recommends RICO prosecutions, asset forfeiture, enhanced punishments, institutional exclusions, public ostracism, and shaming. These organizations are participants in a racial power struggle and globalist enterprise that threatens American sovereignty, calling for decisive action to dismantle them and protect the founding, white, population.